disabled people in the country, and they seem to be largely ignored, and probably, no pun intended, I guess they're a silent majority in being so. But anyway, so it may not occur to most people, but we take talking on the phone for granted. We pick up the phone, we dial it, and we talk. And if you weren't able to speak because of something wrong with your vocal cords or whatever, I'm not an expert on the medical reasons why people can't hear or speak, but if you weren't able to speak for some reason, or if you were unable to hear, or if you were a deaf mute and could do neither, how could you communicate over the phone? It would be a very difficult task, obviously. People who are hearing impaired often rely on lip reading to gather their information from people they're talking to them, but obviously on the phone, until we have reasonably good picture phones, and we've all been waiting about 30 years for that to happen, you're not going to be able to do lip reading over the phone. So, and I don't expect that to happen anytime next couple years at least. So that brings us to TDDs.
I can interject something.
Yes.
I work at a lab which does augmentative communication technology.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that we've done is over a normal phone line, we can do an edge-detected image that basically turns into a cartoon. We're doing this for deaf person to deaf person communication. It doesn't work deaf person to hearing person because hearing people generally don't know sign language. But a deaf person can now do at his regular sign language rate, which is around that of speaking, to another deaf person, be perfectly understood. And we've also seen that if you zoom in, you can lip read.
So this is a camera. This is a camera pointed at someone's lips.
Yes, you can do that.
Or at the universal sign language. Which are you speaking of?
A camera pointed at, if the person wants to do sign language, you can do sign language.
Okay.
Just pointed at them. If it's someone who wants to lip read on the other side, you zoom in really, really close.
On the lips.
On the lips. Well, actually,
picture
on the whole face.
Picture lipophone, I guess you'd call it.
Turns out you can't lip read by just this.
You need the whole facial expression, right? Well, that's interesting. There's new developments in this field all the time, and I'm not an expert in this field, but I knew a little bit about it, and since nobody else was talking about it, I thought I'd take the opportunity to do it. But as this gentleman just explained, there are people working on these other technologies with eliminating the need for typing, which TDDs use, and actually visually being able to do lip reading over the phone. But obviously that would require a significant expense on the part of the people.
A very simple board, which we're producing right now by hand,
Mm-hmm.
for around $150.
Oh, that's great. It works with most existing fax modems.
Yeah,
oh, that's great. I'll get me some information on that after the talk, because I'd like to have that. Anyway, we're getting on the main subject of the most common methods used for hearing and speech impaired people to communicate over the phone are these TDDs, telecommunication devices for the deaf, and they involve basically typing information, just like we're used to typing on a computer keyboard. And those who are familiar with modems know that when you type on your keyboard, those characters each have an individual code, usually what's called an ASCII code, and those ASCII codes are converted into what could be referred to as musical tones, or they don't sound very musical. They contain very variable pitches of audio tones, get sent through the phone line, and then they're decoded at the other end and reconstructed into the letters that we see on our screen. Well, telecommunications devices for the deaf have been around a lot longer than PCs. In fact, the earlier telecommunications devices for the deaf were simply mechanical teletype machines, which have been around since the beginning of probably around the 20s or so. Teletype machines came out. I think one of the most popular TDDs back in the 30s or so was called a Model 15, manufactured by a Teletype Corporation. And for those of you in the audience who might be ham radio operators, you're probably familiar with that particular machine because it was used by Western Union frequently, and then when they upgraded to new models like the Model 33 teletype machine, all these things hit the surplus market, and you could buy a Model 15 teletype machine for next to nothing and use it as a computer printer before computer printers were affordable, when you had to build your own PC before you could buy one in a store. Anyway, the most modern TDDs now are much more compact than the old mechanical TDDs of the past. The ones they use today really don't have any moving parts aside from the key switches on the keyboard, as opposed to the old mechanical teletypewriters, which literally weighed 50 to 100 pounds and had hundreds of gears and levers, and it required oiling, and they were extremely noisy. I guess that wouldn't bother you if you were deaf, but the newer machines are quite compact. I happen to bring my TDD with me. It's manufactured by AT&T. This is their model 2930. It's still currently manufactured. They put it out for the past 3 years. I think I paid about $250 for this at an AT&T product store. You can see that it looks like a standard computer keyboard, although it's not a sculptured keyboard like a lot of us are used to typing on. It's for those of you who've been dealing with computers long enough to remember the original PC Junior or the Peanut. They had the flat chiclet type keys. It has that kind of keyboard, and the folks at AT&T expressed a concern to me that some users of this particular device found it difficult to type on it. I don't at all, but I guess some people who didn't have a lot of manual dexterity might have some difficulty typing on this keyboard. But there is a tactile feedback, and there's a 2-line liquid crystal display of 40 characters across, so a total of 80 characters, and it automatically scrolls to the next line. The way it attaches to your telephone is that it is acoustically coupled, which means there's no electrical connection to the phone line. You don't have to plug in any cords or anything. The handset of the telephone simply rests on the top of the device. For those of you who remember from the earlier days of PCs, when modems were acoustically coupled and you would scream along at 110 or maybe even 300 baud, you can remember hearing the tones, waiting for the carrier and then hanging the phone up in the handset. Well, that's still done with TDDs, because if you leave your house or something and you have a portable TDD, if you're going to a payphone, for instance, and there's not a TDD built into the payphone, there's no connection to plug into. But every phone anybody uses has a handset that you can, this is a cellular phone, but if it were a regular phone, it would have a handset anyway, and you could just plop it on here, and it would, the tones that you type on the keyboard are, the keys you type on the keyboard are converted to tones which go into the microphone of the phone that you're calling from, and the tones from the person on the receiving end of this message are heard by the earpiece of your phone and translated by the computer in the device into text that you see on the screen. Now, getting back to I mentioned about payphones, not too long ago, I don't remember the exact number of years, but I think 3 or 4 years ago, maybe, when was the ADA finally voted in? 1990? Okay. The Americans for Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, I'm going to go over a couple of things that, some mandates, some federal laws that were passed that required that TDDs be made available in public places. And some of the details on that are, I'll quote them here. It's the law if an interior public pay telephone is provided in a stadium or arena, in a convention center, in a hotel with a convention center, or in a covered mall, at least one interior public text telephone shall be provided in the facility. And by public text telephone, we're referring to TDD, Telecommunications Device for the Deaf. In regards to healthcare facilities, the law states, if a public pay telephone is located in or adjacent to a hospital emergency room, hospital recovery room, or hospital waiting room, one public text telephone, or TDD, shall be provided at each location. And it shows, it does show here the date, July 26, 1991, that was passed. And finally, the law states if an interior public payphone is provided in a transit facility, like a train station or bus station, at least one interior public text telephone shall be provided in the station. And where 4 or more public payphones serve a particular entrance to a rail station, and at least one is an interior location, at least one public text telephone shall be provided to serve an entrance. So the bottom line is federal law requires shopping malls, train stations, hospitals to provide text telephones or TDDs, whether or not they have hearing impaired people that work there or visit there. It's the law, they've got to be there. It's just like ramps have to be in buildings for wheelchair access now. They might not get any wheelchair people, but you've got to have the ramps there, and it's a good idea. I don't know if many of the people here have noticed the public TDDs, but if you notice what you'll notice often is is a payphone or a sign near the payphone that looks like a telephone handset at the top of the sign with a few white squares underneath. I wish I had a copy of the logo here. There's an international logo that symbolizes TDDs, and it basically looks like a telephone handset with 3 rows of white keys under it, and it's sort of a white on black logo, and that is to symbolize that a TDD is available at this facility. Often I've found, and I'm not hearing impaired, but I just find this interesting, often I've found whoever manages whatever facility it is, whether it's a shopping mall or a hotel or whatever, they don't have the TDDs out. They just have a sign saying, if you need one of these, come to this floor and see someone. Now, I'm not sure whether that complies with the law or not, but it seems to be the norm that they aren't really out in the open in most cases. Oh, yeah, you had a question.
An electronic drawer.
Yeah, I'm going to touch on that. Yeah, she had mentioned something I was just going to bring up, that in some facilities where it may not be immediately obvious that there's a TDD available, you might notice that some of the payphones have an extra metal shelving to the bottom of it, maybe a foot deep or maybe 10 inches deep underneath, and there's a red light on the front of it. And that may or may not, usually it'll have a sign above it saying TDD telephone. You can use it as a regular payphone, but what happens is if you pick up the phone and dial a number that reaches a TDD, the payphone will detect that tone, or actually the TDD underneath that phone will detect it and automatically slide out on a motorized drawer. So most people don't even notice these TDDs because they're hidden underneath the payphone. And if you ever want to see one of these for yourself, a good way to do that is to walk up to one of these public text telephones, assuming there's no one who's hearing or speech impaired waiting to use it, and dial this number. You might want to take this number down. It's 800-855-1155. That is a national AT&T operator services number for hearing and speech impaired people who are using TDDs. If you call that number, you'll hear a tone that kind of sounds like a modem tone, although you can very clearly hear a shift between 2 different pitches, high and low pitch. It sounds very, very slow compared to the modem tones we're used to hearing, especially like 14.4, which is just like a buzz. Yeah, you were going to say something.
You can't use the modem to call that number.
Yeah, I'm going to be touching on that as well.
Say the number again.
Yes, the national number for AT&T operator services for TDD users is 1-800-855-1155. Everyone in this room can try this out by going to a facility where there's a public pay telephone. South Street Seaport, Penn Station, Staten Island Ferry. People are volunteering places they're aware of. Maybe this hotel, I don't know, but I would think that they'd be required of having one. You probably would have to ask the manager, and they'd have to pull it out of the shelf or whatever they do. But in any case, if you call that number, you'll hear a tone, and if you're at a public pay telephone that has a TDD attached to it, in most cases it's in a motorized drawer that will slide out, and you'll see something like this facing you. Usually it's a gleaming stainless steel unit, though, which looks like it's indestructible. And then when you're done making the call, it detects the tones have stopped and it slides back in. If you have a home telephone, you obviously don't have to wait for anything to slide out because you have this device you can carry around. I didn't mention this, but this particular unit folds up just like about the size of a VHS video cassette, and it recharges. I guess you can get about 2 or 3 hours of continuous use out of it. It's kind of a battery hog, but you just got to charge it up frequently. I wanted to touch on the fact that you can, if you don't have access to a regular TDD, that you can access some of these services now with a regular computer modem. Not all services that are provided to TDD users are accessible by regular modem, and the reason for that is TDDs traditionally have used a telecommunications code. We're most familiar with the telecommunications telecommunications code called ASCII, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange. Well, that was developed, I believe, in the late 60s or the early 70s. Prior to that, there were other codes, EPSIDIC, but prior to that, the main telecommunications code for sending text was something called Baudot, and it's named after a French researcher, but a lot of people dispute that he was the discoverer of it and will call it the Murray code, but the bottom line is it's a 5-bit code as opposed to ASCII, which is a 7-bit code, and it only supports uppercase.
There is a shift character. There is actually a character which is shift.
Oh, that's true. It's a pseudo upper and lowercase character set. As I was stood corrected here, it's a throwback from the days when these were mechanical machines. The way they got around not having just uppercase is they would have one code that would tell the machine, the old teletype machine, to shift a new set of gears in that would drive a lower set of characters. So if you got a code to say go uppercase, then everything from then on would be uppercase, or if you got another code, it'd be all lowercase. But generally speaking, most TD users didn't bother with the upper and lowercase because either the machine didn't support it or whatever. But the bottom line is ASCII is not compatible still with some TDDs because it's a 7-bit code and the data rates are different. We're most familiar with the well, maybe the old Bell 103 standard, which is 300 baud. I forget what 110 was, but then there's 202, which is 1200 baud, and then the whole slew of VDOT whatever protocols, which were 2400 baud, and we're up to 14.4 and VDOT 34 now. Well, they're all incompatible with some of the older TDDs. We're finding more and more services now accept both ASCII now and Baudot code. This particular machine supports both 300 baud ASCII and Baudot, and the baud rate, by the way, on Baudot is 45.5 baud. And if that sounds really slow, it is, but it's still not much slower than an average person can read. It's not too ponderous. I mean, if somebody's typing as quick as they can at 45.5 baud, it doesn't seem like you're tapping your fingers, but it's certainly not what we're used to with 14.4 modems with the screen filling up almost instantaneously. But nobody can read that fast anyway, so it doesn't really affect people who are using this just for casual conversation. There's another thing I want to touch on briefly, and that's a machine called Telebraille, which I just found out about recently. Maybe you can mention to me, explain what Telebraille is about.
Which version? Okay.
The most common version of Telebraille. I just found out about it this afternoon. I was reading. It's like, oh, Telebraille. It's something I've never heard of. It's really not a TDD, but it's for blind.
Yeah, there's a whole section of the population that is deafblind. If they're just blind, they can use a telephone normally without any problems. But it's basically a TDD with a little Braille reader on it. It's got the Braille code with pins that pop up.
So it'd be something similar to this, but with a raised dots that would move across the display?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I'm not sure how they would do that mechanically, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, it's not that difficult.
So.
And it's the same sort of system. You just hook the phone up and go with it.
That's really interesting.
And a lot of them are TDD compatible and modem compatible.
Right. So you actually can have a telephone conversation by just sensing something with your fingers. And if you got to do it that way, then it's not so bad because it's the only thing you got. So I want to mention some other telephone numbers that you can try calling. I did mention the main directory service number for AT&T for TDDs, which is 800-855-1155. You can call the AT&T Special Needs Center. AT&T has a special division of their company dedicated just for people with special needs, such as hearing and speech impaired people, or maybe blind people as well, that have problems telecommunicating and need special services or products. And the number for AT&T Special Needs, the voice number is 800-233-1222, and a TDD number they've set up for the AT&T Special Needs Center is 800-833-3232. There's another service made available by the various Bell operating companies, I believe, called relay services. Now, you may know someone who is hearing impaired or speech impaired, but you don't own a TDD, and you don't want to go running out to a payphone where there is one. You just want to call them from your home. There's still a way you can communicate over the phone, and that is to use one of these relay services, which are, again, required by federal law that the Bell operating companies provide these services. in my area in Pennsylvania, and I just called this number here from my cellular phone, and I got a carrier, so I assume it's valid in New York as well. The toll-free number 800-654-5984 will connect you with a relay service. Yes.
And I think for people that aren't sure what the numbers are, usually they're listed in your local.
Yeah, if you look at the beginning of your telephone book where it has all that information like how to dial a phone and stuff like that, it has that information in there usually. And if you're not sure, call the AT&T Special Needs Center and they will point you in the right direction. What was I?
Well, I have a question about your TDD.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have an interactive mode where it doesn't have to use the telephones? Because I've seen ones where someone will go into a store who only speaks sign language. They pull out their TDD and type on it so the clerk can see it.
Sure, yeah. It doesn't. This unit doesn't really know if it's sending information to a phone or not. It knows if it's heard something, but just as a point of interest, I was demonstrating some radio surveillance equipment at my table over here, and a speech-impaired person came up to me, and he saw this, and he knew what it was, because he obviously had used one before, and he started writing a message to me. I said, no, use this. And so he typed some messages to me that he was deaf and that he uses a TDD, and it was great. You know, so you can type messages on this. It's kind of like being on a computer, a communication software in local mode, where every character you type is just echoed back on the screen. That happens with this too. As you type the letters, they appear in the screen. And for those of you who did not hear what that actually sounds like, I will let you hear what the Bordeaux tones sound like. If we can have some little more mic gain. And this is what a TDD sounds like over the phone. Okay, the message I just typed was this is coming to you from the Hope Conference. I don't know anybody who can check that out by ear. I happen to be a ham radio operator. I'm interested in all forms of communications, and I can tell by ear whether it's Bordeaux at 45.5 baud or ASCII at 110. You can just tell. And there's other forms of communications that go over shortwave radio, radio teletype and so forth. You can tell from kind of how it sounds, like what speed it is and so forth. There are people, surprisingly, who can because I'm a ham radio operator, who can understand Morse code up to like 40-some words a minute, and that has always amazed me. I'm lucky if I can do 18 or 19, but that's another method people can use to communicate if they can't speak. But that's getting off the subject. Three models that AT&T sells. AT&T seems to be the biggest provider of these, although I stand corrected on that.
There's a whole bunch of different.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of companies that make these, but most of the.
You have to find the right catalog and
yeah.
be surprised. Do you think everyone had one?
What would be a good source for finding out about other besides calling the AT&T Special Needs Center? Obviously, they're not going to send you elsewhere. Where could one find out about other devices from other companies?
States have a resource center that, like in Delaware, it's called DATI.
DATI in Delaware.
Something.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and you can look it up in generally the blue pages.
The blue pages of a telephone directory.
And they'll go and get you in contact.
This is usually a state agencies?
Yes.
Okay.
Some sort of state agency.
That's interesting. And you, as far as you know, these exist in most states?
Yeah, as far as I know.
Okay. You had a comment there?
Also go to a sign language school.
Ah, a sign language school.
You know, that companies that sell products for the hearing impaired, like vibrating alarm clocks, or TVs and stuff like that. For example, that's the American Sign Language Institute on 23rd Street and other places like that.
Great.
Or any school that has like a deaf program, like LaGuardia, I think.
Great. Yeah, you kind of have to, if you're not already involved with the whole culture, then you have to seek this stuff out. And I kind of sought it out a little bit because I'm just interested in every possible form of communications. But as the people here in the audience said, if you hunt around and make some phone calls and maybe contact a school for the hearing impaired or speech impaired or the blind or deaf or whatever, you might be able to get some leads as to where you can find a reasonably priced device. Maybe I'm not sure, but there may be a market for used devices as well. I don't know. People I would assume would want to upgrade from one model to another, just like people upgrade computers, although I hope they don't have to do it as frequently as we in the computer area have to. I did mention that some of these services can be accessed by a normal computer, and I'm going to give you the technical details on how to do that. You're going to need a standard PC communications package with a modem that communicates at least 300 baud. Darn, it leaves a lot of you out, I know. Most of these services communicate, when they are compatible with ASCII, communicate at either 300, 1200, or 2400 with automatic fallback if you only have a 300 baud modem. The settings you want to set your communication software are 8 data bits, no parity, and 1 stop bit. Check into the sub-menus of your communication software to enable the flow control. And you also want to enable the X on, X off protocol. All those things are important. If you don't have 8 data bits, no stop bits, or 8 data bits, no parity, and 1 stop bit. Oh, and it has to be half duplex. I forgot to add that. That's very important. It must be half duplex. You have to use flow control, and you have to have your X on, X off enabled. Then if you call, for instance, that 800-855-1155 number with your computer, you can just type, if you have a Hayes compatible modem, you could from the blank communication screen, I guess you could just type ATD and T if you have a tone modem. ATDT 1-800-855-1155, and then after the modem dials, you'll hear a carrier tone, and then you'll be connected. Now the way that works, it's kind of interesting. You'll be connected with an operator who has one of these TDDs. Generally, I've just from communicating with them and doing a little social engineering, I've found most of them are not disabled. They're just they can hear and they can speak. This is just their job with AT&T or the Bell operating company they happen to work in. What I find is really strange is that the operators who handle directory assistance services, like looking up telephone numbers for you via TDD, aren't linked into any kind of computer system. They have, and I find this sometimes if you call, you'll get. I live outside of Philadelphia, and there's a big central office near where I live in Wayne, Pennsylvania. But there's a TDD office in there where they have directory assistance services for the hearing impaired. I've talked to TDD operators in Washington, in North Carolina, and other areas. It's just luck of the draw. When you call that number, depending on the traffic patterns of the telecommunications system, you get routed to wherever they have people available. But what I find interesting, I was starting to say, it's ironic, is AT&T bills itself as, the company of the future, and you will experience this and that and whatever in the future. Yet they're still using manual telephone directories at these offices, manual phone books for their areas. They have them on a shelf, and another telephone, which if they can't find it in the phone book, what they'll do is they'll say, please hold. They'll type, they won't say this, they'll type in, please hold while we look up your number. And you hold while they pick up another phone and call a regular voice directory assistance operator, and they'll ask that information of them and then type that in. And that whole process takes a good minute, which is, I find it almost excruciatingly slow. It's not like when you call a regular directory assistance operator, they can just type a few keystrokes. You can hear the keystrokes in the background usually, and then they just connect you with some automated voice that tells you the number. Well, TDD users unfortunately have to suffer through this awkward, painfully slow, and technologically anachronistic method where they don't have online computers. And I've asked some of the operators, well, why don't you have some sort of online system where you could have a TDD integrated with a directory assistance terminal like regular directory assistance operators? And they said, we don't know, this is our job and whatever. I found from a hacker standpoint, I'm a hacker, that the TDD operators are often much more susceptible to social engineering than a regular operator because they have really boring jobs. Evidently, they don't get a lot of calls. So you can have some pretty interesting conversations with these operators just by typing on the TDD. And one of the other advantages I found to using a TDD is that it's a toll-free number when you call directory assistance via this, as opposed to dialing the area code and the number when you have to pay 75 cents. Now, just recently, I found last year, they said, oh, we're going to put a stop to this. These people shouldn't be getting free. AT&T decided they shouldn't be getting free directory assistance services. So they put in an ANI or ANAC type system whereby they knew who was calling, and then they wrote something down or whatever that like 2 months later you get this bill in the mail, this addendum to your phone bill, like it's $1.50. Now, from all the laws that I've read, they're not legally allowed to charge you more than the going rate for directory assistance services, yet the times I've done it, they've charged me like $1.50. So I've always called them and complained, and so oftentimes I've even had to ask for supervisors to get them to take it off my bill, and they have. So I've found a way around that, and the only reason I'm saying this is because they're being jerks about this. So what I've done is you can eliminate having to deal with the automatic identification of giving your phone number up whenever you call an 800 number. For those of you who don't know, whenever you call a toll-free number, the person you're calling will know your phone number. Either they'll know it immediately if they have the right equipment, or they'll know at the end of the month when they get their watts bill. So just be aware of that from a privacy standpoint. But one way around this exorbitant fee that AT&T is charging is if you just dial 0 and tell the operator, I've been trying to dial this toll-free number and I can't seem to get an answer. Can you try it for me? And they'll say, what's the number? And it's 800-855-1155. And they'll try it. And then as soon as you hear it ring, say, thank you, operator. And then you hang your phone up in here in the thing and you process your call. The operator will at that point ask you for who you want to contact, or the number of the person, the name of the person whose number you want, and you have to tell them the name and the city and the name of the city and so forth, like you do regular directory assistance. But then, if you call through the operator, I've found they will ask you, what number are you calling from? So what I have frequently done is just give them the number of my local AT&T office, so who evidently gets the bill. So it's just desserts as far as I'm concerned. You were going to add something.
That doesn't work anymore with the 0. When you dial 0, you used to be able to...
I did it last week twice.
Really? Because I found out that when I dialed the 9X operator, they're not allowed to place 800 calls. And what I've done is...
That may be a New York policy. That may be a 9X policy. I'm from Bell Atlantic land, so you may be right about that for this area.
And now what they do is they play you... If they try to dial the 800 number, record it, instead of it going to the 800 number, a recording comes on saying, we're sorry, the local operators are not able to dial 800 numbers.
Well, that's pretty lame of 9X. As you can see, I have a T-shirt that says X9X. I'm a former 9X employee.
I had AT&T dial number, and if you dial certain numbers, AT&T will not dial it, and if you dial certain numbers, AT&T will be able to dial it. So.
Go figure. Well, if they're, the way I look at it is if they're going to charge you an exorbitant fee, then I'm going to find a way around it. And if they charge a fair fee, I wouldn't mind. But you can do it from a payphone, but if you're home, you don't want to have to go out to a payphone to find a TDD. Yeah, that's true. If you call long-distance directory assistance from a payphone on a normal phone, you got to do it that way. So, were there any questions anybody had about? One question I wanted to ask the audience. I know there were special numbers set up for emergency services, like hearing people and speaking people can call 911 for that system. I know in the New York area, there's another number you can call. I think it's a 3-digit number. Does anybody? 311? Okay. If you call 311 from a cellular phone, or not from a cellular phone, from any phone, you will get a TDD operator, a TDD emergency operator. So they've set up these systems. And I've also found Emmanuel Goldstein had called me with some interesting tape recordings of some phone messages, and I said, they sound like TDD messages. So he played them over the phone to me, and I just held the phone up to my TDD, and we were able to decode the messages. It's pretty interesting. One last thing I want to say is the way one advantage to the lower speed Baudot 45.5 baud thing is it doesn't require a carrier like we're used to using modems. You can record these TDD messages on an answering machine, and somebody can play them back and decode them because it's just audio tones. Voicemail systems, you could leave messages for people on a voicemail system via TDDs. I've done that, and actually I found it's sort of a crude but sort of effective security method of leaving messages. An average person, it's like, what is this noise? They're not going to know what it is. They're not going to know it's a TDD. I wouldn't say that if somebody really wanted to know what it was, they couldn't figure it out. But you can leave messages on voicemail or answering machines with a TDD, and the person who retrieves them can just hold their TDD up to the speaker of their answering machine, and it will decode and display on the unit. So it has that advantage. You couldn't do that with a computer type message, because modems, and if they don't detect the carrier, they hang up right away. So, any questions about TDDs that I might be able to answer? Yeah.
I wonder if you mentioned the AT&T 2000
Oh yeah, that's something. Well, they kind of pulled back on that a little bit, but yeah, you folks might have, and there was some mention of this. Okay, for those of you who are 2600 readers, and many of you probably are, or you wouldn't be here. You've probably seen these AT&T or read about these AT&T 2000 phones. There's a public pay phone that looks very futuristic. There's a color video display on it and a keyboard and all this. Well, those things are combination regular ASCII computer terminals and TDDs. Evidently, there was some ruling a few months ago that forbade AT&T from having the ASCII part of that to work anymore as a regular telephone modem. It didn't go with certain tariffs or something, but you can still use these as TDDs. However, I found they nail you on a charge every time. You cannot call the toll-free directory assistance number 800-855-1155 from one of these. It won't work. They nail you. The operator comes on and says, or and types, please deposit the money or whatever. So, I'm sorry. So I guess they asked for. I'm sorry. They asked for a credit card number. Right. So you can't even use a red box. So you have to give them a card number. Yes.
They can't charge for 800 numbers.
That's something I have stated to AT&T. If you call an 800 number, there should not be a charge because it's a toll-free number. I mean, that's the whole definition of an 800 number. It's called a toll-free number. Yet, if you call 800-855-1155, the operator who types the message back to you when you ask for directory assistance information at no point anywhere says that there's any charge involved with calling this toll-free number. And like 2 months later, you get this delayed $1.50 charge. And every time I've disputed it, that's the rationale I've used. That I called a toll-free 800 number, and what is this charge? I was never informed that there was a charge. Now, you had heard that there was some law or something saying you could not charge for calling an 800 number. Why is AT&T doing this to us?
I mean, technically, the way the laws are currently written, you can't even use a TDD or modem without violating the law because it's in code. In fact, you can't even go and call someone and say the dog barks at midnight because it's in code. So,
well, we could use a clipper chip. They don't mind that, do they?
Right now they do. But
yeah.
I'm not saying any of this is...
By the way, I'll be demonstrating a clipper chip tomorrow.
I'm not saying it's even possibly enforced. It's just, the laws are, you can't drive pigs on Main Street at noon.
Yeah, I think we probably all agree that no human being can go through a single day without breaking some laws inadvertently. So that's just our legislature. Yeah, you're going to add something else?
Well, no, does it work when you call the supervisor and say,
Yeah, but you have to raise hell, and you have to go through 1 or 2 levels up. I always enjoy it because I don't give up, and they can't hang up on you. So I've got them. I'll talk with them for an hour to get it off, but they're not allowed to hang up on you. And if they do, before I as I initialize the conversation, I get their name. So whenever you get somebody's name, especially an operator's name first, they will never be rude to you or hang up because they know that you can call their supervisor and get them fired or at least in a lot of trouble. So, you're going to add something?
Can you use a TDD as a low-cost alphanumeric paging terminal? Do those systems accept?
No, unfortunately. That would be a good idea. I wish someone would come up with a sort of an all-in-one solution. He'd asked whether you can use one of these things to send text messages to these new alphanumeric pagers, which I'm not lucky enough to have yet. But I have a display page, just regular digital display pager. No, there is a device, a company called Page Entry, P-A-G-E-N-T-R-Y. I believe they have a toll-free number. If you call them, they make a little calculator-sized device that can be used to send text messages and faxes, surprisingly. You can type a message and it'll come out a fax machine, or send messages to a text pager. Now with the advent of digital signal processing technology becoming mainstream, somebody could easily, or not without too much difficulty, somebody like AT&T could easily design a device that could send messages to text pagers, which would be valuable to hearing impaired people, I would think, and send Baudot and ASCII messages. But they haven't come out with one. This isn't really a hugely profitable market, since there aren't as you'd think they'd come out with this stuff, because there's 22 million people that might need these things, but they just don't seem to come out with things that people want generally. Yeah. I'm sorry?
Baudot modems came and went. There were a couple modems that actually included it back in the...
Baudot modems?
Yeah, there actually were some on the market at one time.
I'm sorry, I can't understand what you're saying.
There actually were some.
There were some Baudot modems.
Yeah.
Well, this is a Baudot modem.
No, I mean actually as like computer modems.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Before ASCII caught
I
on.
mean, the Apple Cat for the Apple II was...
It also did Baudot. Yeah, that was one of the best modems ever made. I still think that. Thank John Draper for that.
What is Baudot?
Baudot is just a way of saying ASCII, but it's referring to a different telecommunications code. Baudot is a name of a French guy who came up with this code, I guess. I don't know. But when you say Baudot, you're referring to the 5-bit telecommunications code, unlike ASCII, which is 7-bit telecommunications code. But if that doesn't make sense to you, go to the library and look it up, because they can explain it better than I can in the book.
What do you do if you call from a payphone and they say that they can't build a payphone at the number?
He'd asked if you call from a payphone and you give that number, do they say they can't bill through a payphone? I don't know. I've never tried to give them a payphone number. I just usually give them the number of my local AT&T office.
They don't have ANI, you have to give them your number?
Well, not if you call through an operator, they don't have ANI.
No, I'm saying if you dial it direct from a payphone, they know your number, right?
Yes.
So if you keep doing that,
That's a good question. I have not done that. If you dial just from a regular payphone with one of these things, that 800 number, ostensibly, I don't know whether they would ask you the number of your home, or whether they would ostensibly just bill that payphone number. I don't know. That's a good question. I've never tried it. Yeah, well, that's their fault. So, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. I actually tried that number, the 1-800.
Yeah, you tried that number.
I do it through my work at my PBX, plus I handle the phone audit.
Uh-huh.
I don't have problems with the charges. But my question is that when I dialed in, right, and I put on half duplex.
Right.
I saw a little, they're not garbage, but I saw something like GA, and I was just wondering.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad you touched on that. Yeah, there's what are called human TDD protocols, little abbreviations which make it easier for people to send messages without typing out whole words. He said he saw things that said GA on the screen when he tried it. GA means it's an abbreviation for go ahead. It means like, I'm done typing this line, now you reply. That comes normal when we talk. You can tell when somebody's at the end of a sentence and waiting for a reply. But if you're just typing something, you type go ahead. There might be other little niceties like that, but one other I've discovered is at the end of a communication, you type a SK, SK, SK. What does that mean? Stop key. Okay. Stop keying. Okay. I didn't know what it meant, but I use it. It was just a convention. Are there other little conventions you use for typing that?
Sometimes at the end of the line you use K instead of GA. K refers to finished transmission.
Okay. Sometimes you can type. People will type a K at the end of a line instead of GA to go ahead.
And also, if their TDD doesn't have a question mark symbol, they'll put QQ if they're asking a question.
Ah, right. Some TDDs do not provide a question mark character, so you type QQ. And I noticed some of the directory assist operators use the Qs instead of question marks. So that's probably
There's no displays, perhaps.
right. So I guess they use the lowest common denominator. That makes sense. I'm going to have to leave here because I'm expanding over past my time, but I'll take two more questions. Up here?
Yeah, if you're interested in building your own TDY device, TDD device, a program called HAMCOM, which is used for witty communications, you can build a very, very simple build circuit, which will encode it and self-transmit.
It's a ham radio program called HAMCOMP, HAMCOMP. Is it public domain or is it HAMCOM? Is it for sale or is it public domain? That's great. I've been looking for something like that. And that'll communicate at like 45.5 baud. Now you're still going to have to build some kind of a hardware device though.
Very simple.
Would you use like an XR2211 chip or something or what?
It's actually an op-amp that they use.
Oh yeah?
That plugs into
Is there a particular magazine article that detailed how to do that you're aware of? Really? That's great. You could build your own one of these with a public domain software package and the text instructions in there on how to using a little op amp to make your own. So I'm going to do that myself just for the challenge. Hamcom. Contact your local ham radio club if you don't know where to get that, and they'll point in the right direction.
I've seen someone built an extension to an HP48 SX calculator that did TDD.
Great idea. Somebody programmed an HP48 calculator to do TDD work. That's fantastic. I'm going to have to go. Yeah, one more question.
Is it possible to place an incoming TDD call to one of those payphones that's equipped with the drawer?
Yes. Yes, you can do that unless it's a payphone that doesn't accept incoming calls. And some of the payphones that have his question was, can you call a payphone that has a TDD from another TDD, and will it answer? COCOTS, as probably most of us are aware, you can't accept calls at COCOTS because you can't. There's technical reasons for that. But
Is there a light on the phone?
I'm sorry.
How do you know it's ringing?
When what?
If you're deaf, how do you know?
Oh, you have a light.
The light wouldn't start flashing until you took the handset with
The drawer is on one of
it.
Oh, on the payphones. Yeah, that's where there's a red light. There's a red light on the front of the keyboard, on the front of the keyboard drawer on these public pay TDD phones. And when it's ringing, and if it's a Bell operating an RBox phone, you'll see this light flashing, along with the ringing. So you can actually see it ringing. But if it's a COCOT, it's not going to take incoming calls, regardless of whether it's a TDD phone or not, because it's a COCOT. So, whatever. I got to go. Thanks for your time, and bye-bye.